Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this Truth Bomb riff. My name is Patrick Lovell, the producer with the $71 trillion truth. And my compunction this morning is to address all Bernie Sanders supporters. Now, Bernie's going to be appearing in Las Vegas, Nevada today. It is Thursday, March 20th, 2025, approximately 10 a.m. my time, and he's going to be gathering thousands of people on his Anti-Oligarchy Tour that will also feature Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, in their effort to rally the American people where they are to build a grassroots sort of reaction to all things that are happening at the moment, from Trump and Elon to Doge, in the manner, shape, and form that really Bernie has been promulgating for as long as I've known who he was. Now, I'm a producer, and my first foray into all things that have become really my obsession and what I'm doing and what I'm all about started after the 2008 great financial crisis, where I made a film, a documentary film called Forward 13 Waking Up the American Dream. And I remember crisscrossing this country, surfing the Occupy Wall Street movement with my colleague Eric Vaughn, where we started in the Northwest, worked our way down the coast, all the way through the Southwest, through Texas, up through Tornado Alley, into the into the heartland, and then ultimately into the Rust Belt, and on way through the corridor of basically what I would consider Oz, because the whole thing felt like the Yellow Brick Road to me, when we wound up in DC and NYC. And we literally got started on the day that the Occupy Wall Street movement started. And then we ended filming the day that the Occupy Wall Street movement got shut down in New York City. And ultimately, it was interesting because I had never heard of Bernie Sanders prior to this incredible engagement that I had gone on, that was basically prologue to everything that I would learn. But I came across this YouTube speech of the senator on the floor of the House, basically delivering a speech that was the summary of everything that I had discovered. So I put Bernie as the closing argument of my first film, in which he declared that the billionaires are the problem and that this country isn't designed for and of by the corruption, which is exactly what my journey was all about, to try to understand. And I've been on the mission ever since, as has Bernie. Now, we're literally now in 2025. Bernie ran for president in 2016, and obviously he ran for president and the Democratic nomination in 2020. But he was, of course, maneuvered, manipulated, knee capped, however you want to describe the DNC. And those of us who know everything that took place at that time period know what happened to Bernie. But one thing I've been critical about Bernie for the whole time is that Bernie Sanders has been lacking detail. And the problem with that is, when you consider his argument and you consider everything that is, again, an amalgamation of everything that has been transpiring over the past 14 years, and underscores why Bernie, in my opinion, is not president, is because he has been playing by the rules of the corrupt the whole time. And those of you who have been big Bernie fans know that it was the Occupy Wall Street movement that really elevated Bernie, when he started to kind of tap into all that was resonating from that time period. But then he had an incredible pivot. And I need to address that initially so that you can understand sort of the full picture of what it is that I'm trying to get you to understand. So when Bernie was running for president, there was a debate in Brooklyn in 2016 featuring him and of course, Hillary Clinton. I was just stalling because I was thinking, was there anybody else on the stage? I can't remember if there was somebody else on the stage at that time. But Bernie had won a number of races in different states, and he was building delegates. But then the super delegates were saying that they weren't going to commit to Bernie, and that was part of the DNC and everything else. But there was this incredibly important moment, particularly because I had a front row seat to this whole thing, where Bernie Sanders said in front of the nation that Wall Street's business model is fraud. Now, I can't remember who was moderating the debate. It was somebody from NBC. If memory serves, it might have been the disgraced Matt Stoller, if that's his name, the guy that used to be on Good Morning America, that basically was, you know, TV's version of Harvey Weinstein. But and he was like part of the national fabric for decades, quite frankly, in terms of people turning on their televisions in the morning, and he was always there. And I wonder if I got his name wrong, as a matter of fact, but it doesn't matter. But it was either him or somebody from, I think the panel might have been NBC. But the long and the short of it is, you could have heard a pin drop after Bernie Sanders had made that proclamation. Now, the reason why I was just one, jumping to the ceiling was that because I'd been working with a gentleman by the name of William K. Black. Now, William K. Black, I had discovered because he had made an appearance on this incredible Sunday morning show by the name of Bill Moyers on PBS. And that was the first time I had actually discovered who William K. Black was. And he started to reveal all of the details of what created the 2008 great financial crisis. Now, I was discovering a lot more because I was investigating, because I was doing, these productions, and it was starting with my first film, Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream. But I was trying to put all of the pieces together, and I was trying to answer questions that didn't make sense to me. That took me years and years and years and thousands of hours and millions of dollars to accomplish. But I would never have been able to do it without discovering William K. Black. And then, of course, having the unbelievable honor to be able to follow in his footsteps and learn directly from him throughout this entire process. William K. Black, back during the late 80s, early 90s, was the general counsel of the Office of Thrift Supervision. And he and an elite group of guys had put together an investigation to break up what was then known as the savings and loan crisis. Very complicated white collar fraud, very sophisticated racketeering scheme. And he and his colleagues had put away, after creating over 30,000 criminal referrals at the FBI, they got, I believe, 1,700 criminal convictions of the most elite white collar fraudsters in the country, who are all the heads of these S&L banks, who had the most expensive and most dangerous professional, well, just the most dangerous defense lawyers that existed, that the best money could buy, which is difficult to get convictions against them. But William Black and his crew actually did. And they proved that a government of, by, and for the people that has, predicated on the supremacy of law can break up massive, widespread corruption. And that's exactly what they did. And fast forward to this time in 2016, when I was working closely with William K. Black at the time, and unbeknownst to me, Bill had become a consultant to Bernie Sanders. He, alongside another consultant, an economic consultant to Bernie Sanders, a woman by the name of Stephanie Kelton, were part of the same University of Kansas City, Missouri matrix that Bernie was relying on to get much of his information that he was running on the stump with. And that proclamation that Wall Street's business model was fraud came directly from William K. Black and his consulting to Bernie Sanders. Now, unfortunately, Bernie isn't big on details. Now, Bernie might be big on details in terms of budgets and things that are in his, sort of purview from his responsibility, particularly going back to his days as a mayor in Burlington, Vermont, and, his understanding of taxes and, budgeting and the process and everything else. But he's always been a socialist. He's always been a humanist. He's always been on the side of progressivism, and he's always been on the side of civil rights. And so Bernie Sanders has always been that guy, going back to the 60s and war protests in Vietnam and civil rights and all of those sorts of things. That was the world that, basically created Bernie. But so too, of course, those of you who know his story, was his family life. I mean, his history, his family, Jewish, escaped Nazis, that sort of thing, and grew up in Brooklyn in a working class family, and, understood the reality of working class people. And that's what he's represented his entire career. So he makes it into the Senate. He becomes a national really lightning storm, quite frankly, because of that time period, which inspired me to put him at the end and make the closing argument of my film. But you know, again, between the comment that Wall Street's business model is fraud and what he was saying on the floor of the House is literally the same exact thing he's been saying for 14 years. His position is to connect with the working class, to groundswell them to understand that the threat is the billionaire class, and that, of course, all things Trump and Elon are the most recent expression of it. Even though we've been dealing with Trump for at least the last 10 years, especially going back to his first administration, that Bernie probably would have won had it not been for the DNC, and ultimately if he would have delivered the details that I have. But he didn't, and he didn't want to deliver the details, even though when he started tapping into that Wall Street's business model fraud fulcrum, he electrified Occupy Wall Street. He ended up getting donations, small dollar donations, to the tune of north of $140 million. And then suddenly, mysteriously, he pivoted to universal health care and all of these other sorts of socialist, shall we say, or more accurately, democratic socialist platform that literally goes back to the New Deal. I mean, that's what the whole FDR administration was all about. And so when Bernie is representing the working class and he's representing veterans and he's representing really a lot of vulnerable people in the system that require government assistance to, in many ways, just follow through with the benefits that, whether it's Social Security or, of course, veterans benefits and so on and so forth, are made whole because of the commitment by the federal government. And so within the whole construct, that's primarily his position. Now, he was elevated because of the problem that followed of the 2008 great financial crisis, in that he was speaking and he hit a nerve and the verve of millions of people around the country rising up to say, what the hell is going on? What's going on with the disparity of wealth? What's going on with this lack of convictions on Wall Street, and so on and so forth? And so that electrified the American people, including myself. But then he went to just the platitudes of just the same speech over and over and over. And now he's getting into a little bit more detail with this oligarch tour, just by way of policy. And most importantly, the policy of, we've got to end Citizens United. We've got to end the legalized corruption of dark money forces in our system, which is really the only thing he truly identifies. That's where he's at right now, because he wants to spend more time on just what Doge is doing. Because interestingly enough, both for Bernie and myself, Trump and Elon are this like amalgamation of everything we've been saying for the past 14 years, but in a way that nobody is safe, that nobody can hide in their silos, that everybody is under the thumb because of this unbelievable criminal force that's moving into fascism that we all recognize, and everybody's up in arms and basically trying to find a footing. And of course, the Democrats don't have a response. And, the current controversy, of course, is Chuck Schumer and all of things that are associated with him extending the government budget, for the next 6 months. Meanwhile, he was on tour with the anti-Semitism book and how that plays with all of the turmoil with Gaza and everything else. And everything's a mess. But Bernie is, really the same guy he's always been. And now he's bringing in AOC because AOC has a large audience, and AOC is someone that speaks the same language, even though AOC, like Bernie, speaks in platitudes. And what I'm trying to tell you is neither one of them are threats to corruption, because they do speak in platitudes and they don't know the whole story. Although Bernie should know the whole story, but he doesn't retain it because his mind, his focus is elsewhere. And he's trying to tap in politically to the groundswell to get the numbers of people that are being besieged by all things Doge and the government meltdown and the privatization of the United States, that are counter to everything that matters to the people that are, of this demographic. Because in the United States, informed people are supposed to vote, in their best interest. And of course, 72 million people did, 13 million people, basically waited it out. 3.5 million people got suppressed, and Trump supposedly won the election by 2 million votes, which of course isn't a mandate. But at the same time, they moved fast and furious because the plan was always, was, wait, my mind, I don't know why I can't think of it. Project 2025. There we go. And the unitary presidency and all that goes with it. So in the last 24 hours, what we're seeing is this sort of reaction to this battle between the judiciary and all of these orders on Doge and whether or not, and also deporting immigrants illegally and First Amendment rights and all of the other things in the Constitution that are a constitutional crisis and a War Powers Act, and it goes on and on and on, right? Meanwhile, whatever the relationship is with Putin, and people are literally, and for good measure, losing their minds, as they should. But they should have lost their minds literally 14 years ago, which they did, and then it got suppressed, and there's like ebbs and flows. But millions of people do not understand what Bernie Sanders is leaving out, and that AOC literally doesn't understand. 6 months ago, AOC, that RICO isn't a crime. Now, a lot of her, benefactors or people that are on her side or defense people that understand the law, try to spin it and say, yeah, no, what she's saying is that RICO isn't actually, the crime. It's that the predicate acts under the RICO statutes are the crime. But that's ridiculous because RICO, the mother of all crime, because it's the remedy for organized crime, includes in the predicate acts all of the elements that you can then, convict under the RICO acts. So RICO is a criminal act. And of course, because she's young and she's, basically not in tune with details and doesn't fully understand how the system works, and she's popular, and there's a reason why the Democratic Party wants to give her, airtime and be sort of a bulwark or at least a resistance because she hits a lot of the right, checks off all the right boxes politically. But again, she's not a threat to corruption. When you don't know that RICO is the mother of all remedies for corruption, and yeah, RICO is a crime. It's organized crime, AOC. But then again, it's like Bernie should know, and I think does know, at least on the periphery, everything that I am telling you. But what he's not doing is telling you, and he's not making the case, because when you get inside the belly of the machine and you understand the nuances of all of the elements that make a criminal situation the way they are, you will understand what Bernie is on tour against, the oligarchy. And so the question that you have to understand, and that all people are wondering, how it's possible that the richest man on earth, and then of course everybody goes into the whole deal about, well, he wouldn't have been, who he is if he didn't benefit from the largesse of the United States government, which is true. I think he's got currently $38 billion in contracts for, SpaceX and Starlink and all the rest of it. But, and Tesla wouldn't have been born to begin with, hadn't it been for Obama in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis that tried to, move us into renewables, which was going the right direction until, of course, Biden decided to play, we can be everything to all scenarios. And now we're back to Trump and like drill, baby, drill. Okay. So the crisis that Bernie identifies is incredibly important, whether it's Social Security, where it's the benefits to veterans, whether it's the assault on the working class, whether it's the tax policy, and then ultimately the environment. All of those things are associated with what he's trying to pivot to get people to understand that he's going to be a leader against. By then, we got to get rid of dark money in politics. But none of that is even remotely close to what I've been revealing to you in the Clean New Deal, that you can find at thecleannewdeal.org, which is predicated on the work that I prefaced at the outset of this dialogue, which started where Bernie and I basically intersected because of my work with a guy that was ultimately his consultant. Just to put it into perspective, that's how close I am to this whole thing, right? Except we spent millions of dollars to reveal, how the $90 billion apparatus of the regulatory body on the side of the federal government that includes the FBI, the DOJ, the SEC, and AGs around the country that are there, and also other regulatory bodies to rein in the financial system, to police it, okay? because you have to police anything that has money. Otherwise, there's all sorts of things that can happen. Now, just a quick sidebar that was extremely important in terms of differentiation of how this whole thing played out. During the speech, in response to Bernie Sanders' um, position that fraud was Wall Street's business model, I think the only thing that even got in the same sort of footprint of that dialogue was when the moderator asked Hillary Clinton to respond to the commission she was getting from giving speeches to Goldman Sachs at the time. And she said cleverly, well, that's what they offered. But the idea was, okay, you're talking to the great vampire squid. You're getting paid $400,000 per speech. And we know that Goldman Sachs was involved with a great variety of what created the great financial crisis, but they couldn't say fraud because they actually hadn't been convicted of fraud. They made all sorts of settlements that would happen later, actually in 2016, that are part and parcel to everything that I revealed to you. But the point of this, what I'm trying to make right now, is that Hillary Clinton said, well, what Wall Street did, and this is now I'm kind of creating a blend of what both she and Obama had said at the time, that what Wall Street did was unethical, but it wasn't illegal. She referred to it as shenanigans. Shenanigans is what Blutarsky did at the end of Animal House when he freaking threw the marbles at Dean Werber's, cherished July 4th parade, or whatever the parade that was, and then he took off with Mandy Pepperidge. That's shenanigans, okay? Fraud is illegal theft by deception, and it's characterized by different degrees of felonies, which have different outcomes and remedies. And the mother of all frauds is racketeering, influence, corrupt organization, which can have devastating outcomes for companies that are involved with it. In fact, if you're a large company like Drexel Burnham Lambert, who initially got nailed with RICO back during the Michael Milken age, it was supposed to destroy the entire company and all the shareholders and everything that went with it. But instead, they ended up, basically, and sorry, that didn't make a lot of sense, sweeping it under the rug. And they did a lesser charge, and Milken had to give up his securities licenses and so forth. And then that's a whole nother story. But the point is that because she's an attorney, Hillary Clinton does the legalese word salad to basically make sure that you don't understand, because she's obfuscating what she's trying to elude a direct question. And the moderators were so stupid that they didn't understand that that Hillary Clinton was lying, and that Bernie Sanders had the ultimate, eureka, but they didn't follow up to explain what exactly he meant by that. And that's, again, what I've been revealing to the world the whole time, to the tune of understanding that we've been giving tens of trillions of dollars illegally to the financial system since 2014 to put them above the law and above market forces. It's not capitalism, it's corruption. It's not democracy, it's tyranny, okay? And so when Bernie Sanders is trying to make these appeals to the working class who know they're getting screwed, where they're going to lose their benefits, or in the past, maybe their 401ks, basically get crushed. And that's what happened in the 2008 great financial crisis, is we had a massive global racketeering scheme that started targeting minorities, and then we fed them to the kitty in securities fraud to the investments of the white working class and their pensions. And we blew everybody up, and that's what created Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party. And Occupy Wall Street created Bernie Sanders, and the Tea Party created Donald Trump. And Donald Trump was plagiarizing Bernie Sanders in 2016. Literally. And Bernie Sanders couldn't go in for the kill because he pivoted to try to be all things to all people. And if we've learned anything, is that platitudes isn't going to take down corruption. They'll tell what the platitudes worked really well, obviously, for inflation and this and that on the right for Trump, that none of MAGA really cares about. MAGA cares about power. They care about white supremacy and patriarchy, and that our side's in control, and we don't like trans, and we don't like black people, and we don't like this or that and the other. And we're going to just go back 50 years to make America great when we were completely in charge, and everybody had to basically be our slaves. or, like women are property, I guess. I mean, we have been moving forward in the United States for 248 years through blood and treasure and sacrifice and commitment, from the revolution to the Civil War to the progressive movements, and then into World War II and the war on fascism, and ultimately the civil rights. And each and every time, the good guys ultimately win, but the bad guys have always been there. And now this is like the return of the empire for the criminal class that are the far right, that are also fascist. I call them the new Confederates, or they're neo-Nazis, or they're American First, or they're all manner, shape, or form therein. But what they've got right now, my friends, is they've got control of both houses. They've got the Supreme Court. And then because of what happened with Doge, the purges at the FBI, the DOJ, the Pentagon, they've got all of the guns and the law, which means it's tyranny. There's no separation of powers in this whole ridiculous situation where we've got federal judges that are the only stopgap right now to trying to prevent Donald Trump from moving forward on all things Doge, which are illegal. But Congress isn't stepping up, and nobody's going to stop him. Who's going to stop him? And so Bernie Sanders and AOC are on the campaign trail trying to get people, inspired, invigorated, enlightened, that we got to push back, but without the details. And I don't think we're going to see a free and fair election again in our lifetimes unless millions of you discover what I'm revealing to you. And it's all free, because all the American people buy our lies. The truth, I'm not the savior. The truth is the savior. I'm the deliverer. And what I'm telling you is, when you understand the composite of the blueprint of the con at thecon.tv, that is exactly how Wall Street's business model of fraud was carried out, that Bernie Sanders could not tell you. And then ultimately, I had to move forward because I got quashed by all of the powers that be, because this is how they operate, because they're diabolical villains of deception, and they operate in the shadows because they've got all the resources and the money and the mechanics to create the revolving door that Bernie Sanders is going to address, but he doesn't have a remedy for. We have the remedy in the cleannewdeal.org. And I'll just give you the precepts right now so you can compare and contrast everything that Bernie Sanders is going to say versus what it is that we're revealing. So first and foremost, the precepts of the Clean New Deal. You arrive there by the discovery process when you ask 4 fundamental questions. 1, what is qualified immunity? 2, what is judicial immunity? 3, what is presidential immunity? We should throw in there, do you guys remember the Lethal Weapon movie, ironically starring Mel Gibson, where the South African guy is running this whole scheme in Los Angeles, and he basically shows his badge and he says diplomatic immunity at the end. And then, of course, Riggs freaks out and takes him down anyway, right? Because he's the bad guy. That's literally what these guys are, is they're all the bad guys. And of course, Mel Gibson is on their side. So fiction versus reality, right? But yeah, let's throw in diplomatic immunity there as well. Just kidding. Just wanted to use that reference. So to reboot, what is qualified immunity? What is judicial immunity? What is presidential immunity? And then on top of it, what is the Electoral College? Well, all of that is a perversion of the notion of democracy, in that the law is supreme. It's not. It's not supreme when cops are above the law, when the judges are above the law, when the president is above the law, and that you have a perversion of power where the majority of people can't vote for their leadership because it's going to be basically checked and stolen and dressed down by the Electoral College, which is ruled by the minority, which is ruled by whom? The billionaires. And again, what I'm revealing to you is through Federal Reserve Act 13.3, and this is the ultimate whodunit. This is the singularity. This is how they did it. After they carried out the world's largest racketeering scheme, financial scheme in history that never ended, that led to tens of millions of people being completely wiped out, whether it was people that wound up in the streets, or they got divorces, or they committed suicide. The carnage was absolutely insane. But when you consider that, in addition to that, the law was structured such that Congress is supposed to have the power of the purse, and we've seen how that's been basically maneuvered and whitewashed because of this insanity with Doge and also the law and everything else. So it's right in front of your face. But going back to Federal Reserve Act 13.3, yeah, Congress has the power of the purse, and Congress could have potentially saved the global carnage in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis, which took a $4.5 trillion housing market, turned it into an $800 trillion global calamity, where all of the liquidity seized up in the global markets because they all went bankrupt because of fraud. Illegal theft by deception, that wasn't shenanigans. It was fucking racketeering. It was rape and pillage. It was P. Diddy. It was destruction of millions of lives, Hillary Clinton, which is why you didn't get elected ultimately at the end of the day, which gave the opportunity for the white working class to say, oh my God, the Democrats threw us over the overboard 4 decades ago, like the great George Carlin said. And ultimately, we're going to give this guy, this buffoon, this idiot, who's just saying stuff that, kind of resonates, even though nothing else does. But we'll give him a try because nothing else is working. But it turns out he's the ultimate criminal that's been involved with this stuff the entire time. Donald Trump was indicted on 91 indictments and 34 felony convictions, guilty of the same thing that I am revealing to you, that tens of thousands of people on Wall Street that were involved in tens of millions of felonies that led to the carnage on a global catastrophe that has enabled this opportunity for the billionaires to groundswell, to hijack our government, not just through Citizens United, but through a whole methodology of situations. But the only way they could do it is when they got floated by the full faith and credit of the United States illegally. And why is it illegal? Well, because nobody in their right minds in Congress would have ever been able to say in front of the American people at the time, this is when Carter Glass and Stiegel, were in the aftermath of the Great Depression, and the findings of the one of the greatest heroes in America that nobody knows, Ferdinand Pecora, who laid out all the details of what created the Great Depression so that we could get a Glass-Steagall Act. But what that all means in context to what I'm saying is that nobody would have at that time, when they created the statutes for the exigent lending of the United States government, which was intended for if there's some sort of calamity like war or famine or whatever you can't see, maybe it's like a meteorite coming to the United States or nuclear war or, some sort of economic calamity, that was natural, right? Maybe it was because of famine and war and everything else. You'd have to be, for the United States to continue forward, particularly because of the nature of its, currency in the money and finance and all the rest of it, you have to have lending under exigent circumstances. So sure, it makes sense. So they created Federal Reserve Act 13.3. But they say in the statutes, and you can see this at the cleannewdeal.org, they say in the statutes, and you go to our white paper and pull down, and it says Federal Reserve Act 13.3. It's like in the first 3 pieces of evidence that I cite. You can explore it yourself, but effectively, this is what the statutes say. Yes, exigent circumstances under emergency scenarios that are like basically acts of God, but you can't speculate in real estate or in commodities. That was a caveat that they laid down. Okay, because they knew that's exactly what created the Great Depression. Fast forward through the Clinton administration, where they got rid of all of the New Deal mechanisms that we learned because of the Great Depression, because the whole idea was modernization to create more and more fraud, which led to the savings and loan crisis, the tech bubble, the Enron era frauds, and then ultimately the great financial crisis, and then everything that we've been in the midst of since, which is a lot. And what they did was they enabled, at the time, we were sold a bill of goods because the media got in on this. It was the largest smoke and mirror bullshit in the history of the world, and that's a lot considering everything that's happened. And I just saw some released non-redacted elements of the JFK assassination. That there's a lot to it anyway. But the smoke and mirrors aspect of this was that our government lied to us and media lied to us, all of them. Every single one of them. 60 Minutes, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the Chicago Sun Tribune, or the Chicago Herald. I think it's Miami. I kind of got those mixed up. Doesn't matter. All nation paper, the biggest papers of the nation's paper of record included, could not tell the truth that I'm telling you because they were all connected to it, because everybody depends on finance, especially if you're a large operation. They basically made the American people and everybody below the line, let's call it in the United States 90%, expendable, because they sold us a bill of goods that they were going to create this emergency stimulus where they had $700 billion that Congress had to manifest through the power of the purse to save Wall Street by creating liquidity in the markets. But they never said why we had to create liquidity in the markets. Everybody knew that there was a moral hazard, that Wall Street did something, and then there was the Volcker rule, and there was all these things that all these pigeon heads like Anderson Cooper and Rachel Maddow, quite frankly, in mainstream media, and these idiots at Fox could never comprehend in a million years. But they all bought it because nobody had ever heard those humongous figures before. $700 billion at the time was like, it made everybody's jaw drop. We're going to give Wall Street $700 billion? What? For what? What did they do? I don't even know what they did. Oh, and then it went into all of this other disaster shit. The only one who got close was Senator Carl Levin from Michigan when he put, Lloyd Blankfein, the former CEO of Goldman Sachs, and of course, Jamie Dimon of, Chase, and then what's his name? I already said Blankfein. Moynihan at Bank of America, and so on down the line. When he actually investigated briefly what all of these big, outfits were doing, and they all lied to his face. And he caught him in a massive lie based on an email, and I show you that in the con as well. But ultimately, we didn't provide just $700 billion. We provided $29 trillion in 2009. It turns out it was $33 trillion later. And then we did quantitative easing to the tune of another $16 trillion. I've got all sorts of truth bombs on my Patrick Level Truth Bombs, the con, that reveal all of that. But then ultimately, we ended up giving another $22 trillion during the Trump's first administration using the same methodology before COVID. And that doesn't even include COVID. We're up to $71 trillion before COVID. $71 trillion to a tiny group of people in the United States that represent the billionaire and the billionaire class, okay? The apparatus, the hive, the financial system, high net worth individual, private equity and asset managers and junk bonds, or not junk bonds, hedge funds. And I could go on down the line. They were the recipients of the float capital. Yeah, and it worked out relatively well for everybody in the top 10% because they had assets. They had their houses and everything else. We floated the markets for the last 10 years. We perverted the markets, okay? Moral hazard, but what it means is socialism for criminals. We're not a democracy. We haven't been a democracy for a long time. There's a chance that because of the Electoral College, we've never been a democracy. Maybe more so than most, but the bottom line is, when a state of Wyoming has as much legislative influence because it has the highest percentage of billionaires in the country, compared to a state like California with 50 million people, you should understand what I'm trying to tell you by way of perversion of power in a so-called representative republic or a constitutional republic, okay? But we're not that. We're a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses the full faith and credit of the United States to provide tens of trillions of dollars illegally to the mafiocracy, because that's all this is. So when Elon's talking about, for example, Social Security being a Ponzi scheme, you all know that's bullshit. It's not a Ponzi scheme. The Ponzi scheme is everything that I'm telling you, which is the mafiocracy based off illegal theft and deception and falsification of records and all of the other elements that the 91 indictments of Trump was involved with, but only to the tune of tens of thousands of people in the financial system that were involved with tens of millions of felonies. And oh yeah, by the way, carried out by the courts that did so illegally on behalf of the fraud. That's what I'm revealing to you that Bernie Sanders isn't. Okay, $71 trillion was given to it's not just the billionaires because they got a little leverage. They worked a little bit of, influence in Congress and lobbyists and this and that and the revolving door. And, they just better because of their calculations in media. They got a bigger product, so they create monopolies and antitrust and all this other kind of stuff. Yeah, that's part of it. No, they literally got fed tens of trillions of dollars by the intravenous drug of the Federal Reserve to float capital markets for the last 14 years that put them above the law and above market forces, which of course makes them what, Bernie Sanders fans? P. Diddy. Yeah, what did P. Diddy do? He was running trains in the shadow and freak offs to be able to leverage, all sorts of stuff. So he was The mass manipulators. Same with, quite frankly, Harvey Weinstein in his own right. And it's been going on forever. A lot of guys that get to the top of power in their matrices, they operate this way. It's a perversion, okay? You've ever heard of priests raping their congregation? It's the same kind of shit. It's tyranny, monopoly, fascism, dictatorship, whatever the centralized portion is where everything is about the complicity of power. I've always said that you've got two columns of our soul, okay? All of us, right? And if we're in the grand design, and if I'm God and I'm like letting every single human being in my image live with some sort of eternal judgment, you give them enough rope to hang with, right? And you've got two columns of your soul. You got character, dignity, decency, and dignity, which of course is what Bernie Sanders represents. And then you've got hypocrisy, duplicity, complicity, conformity, in, quite frankly, diabolical betrayal, which is exactly what Donald Trump and Putin and Elon and all of the rest of those goons on that side represent. But people skew one way or the other depending on the circumstances, okay? But there's a methodology to the truth, okay? And this isn't ideology. This isn't philosophy. In a court of law, when you have an investigation into a crime, you discover the evidence through a methodology called discovery, which is what we did. To give you the details of what Bernie Sanders isn't providing to you, to give you the who, did what, when, and how, and the entire casing of the theory of the crime, which in this case is called control fraud. Control fraud by the CEOs of these billionaire classes to puppeteer the whole thing, which is what Bernie Sanders is telling you that they do without all the details, because they use deceptive acts and practices, falsification of business records, perverse incentives, lying, cheating, and deceiving in every which manner, shape, or form to build millions and millions and millions of fucking false securities that they get paid bonuses on short term, i.e. control fraud. And yeah, the remedy is racketeering. And by the way, I found the only RICO conviction in the entire country, and you can find that in the entire world, and you can find that in the con.tv. And I've been just screaming from the mountaintops forever, and I'm not anti-Bernie. Yes, I love Bernie. He's a good guy, right? But Bernie is not the solution. He is not a threat to corruption. I am. And the people I have. I'm not the savior. I'm the deliverer. And I'm also a vector to all the power players, starting with William K. Black and many others that came from the DOJ, the FBI, the SEC, agencies around the country that actually did their job. And I'm still looking for judges out there that want to, tell the story from their side that will reveal that, yeah, there were judges that allowed all of this to happen, to illegally foreclose on millions of people using perjury and falsification of records and allowing it to happen because they got paid. Their courts got paid by this largesse of the crime of the Federal Reserve. And it wasn't legal. It was all illegal. That's what I'm telling you. They stole they stole trillions of dollars. That's all there is to it. That's what AOC doesn't understand. That's what Bernie doesn't understand, even though Bernie does understand it. Trying to think of the guy who came from the Bloomberg, who was a writer, Mark, was it Mark Applebaum, Mark Thompson, Mark Applebaum? Shucks, his name's eluding me. There was this crack journalist from Bloomberg, who sued the Federal Reserve on behalf of Bloomberg to reveal this information that somehow mysteriously got the attention of Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders and what's his name, Alan Grayson from Florida were asking these questions. And quite frankly, at the time, because he's always asking these questions to audit the Fed, was, he ran for president. He's from Texas. His son is the senator from Kentucky, Ron Paul, right? But yeah, they did some investigation. They kind of threatened, and then there were some lawsuits, and this stuff kind of came down the pike. But it wasn't until the Levy study really, did its due diligence that revealed all of the stuff a very long time ago. And by the way, the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission actually interviewed a gentleman by the name of Raj Cohen, who was the partner of Sullivan and Cromwell, the same Sullivan and Cromwell that created the CIA, who just happened to be the point person on what they called the consortium of why they expanded Federal Reserve Act 13.3 to save the financial system, which were the 13 biggest banks in the United States, the too big to fail banks. And he says in this interview that I put on my Federal Reserve Act 13.3 website paper that said, Oh yeah, we knew what we were doing because we didn't know how deep the derivatives pool went. It was a $4.5 trillion housing market that turned into an $800 trillion global calamity because of the nature of this stuff, and we never fixed it, and it's just gotten worse. And crypto's a new version of this stuff. Okay, and I don't want to go into detail about that. The premise of all of this stuff is, guys, please understand that yes, there has to be a revolution. And the way Bernie would describe it is there has to be a revolution in our consumerism, in our intellectual capacity, and also in the way our governance happens, which is exactly right. And a revolution, not meaning a bloody revolution, but a massive reformation to turn everything right side up again because it's all been perverted. And he's right about that. But you can't do it without the details. Now, the only difference, because when we all know that absolute power corrupts absolutely. I also like to cite this great philosopher, libertarian, who happened to come out of 17th century France. And for anybody who knows what was happening then could understand this corollary. But a guy by the name of, my mind is racing. Come on, Patrick. What is Bastiat? Bastiat. There you go. Bastiat said when a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. And that's called tyranny. That's all of these monstrosities throughout history have done over and over and over and over. And here we are yet again. And it's the antithesis of the American Revolution, of the Civil War, and everything else. Guys, look around. The Supreme Court ruled that the 14th Amendment, Section 3, didn't matter. That someone who participated in an insurrection cannot run for an office of the United States, let alone the CEO. And what the Supreme Court shot that down and made Trump the king. And so Bernie's going to tell you Trump isn't a king, that the billionaires own everything, and that they're going to slash your Medicaid and they're going to destroy your Medicare and your Social Security, and the pharmaceuticals are raping you blind, and the billionaires are basically in control of both parties. And of course, right after Trump gave that pseudo State of the Union speech, even though it wasn't a State of the Union speech at the joint session of Congress a couple of weeks ago, where he just lied through his teeth, and then Bernie was forced to take to his own microphone and basically tell you everything that I'm telling you. And by the way, what did the Democrats put forward? A junior senator from Michigan who came out of the CIA. Wow, that's interesting, isn't it? But ultimately, guys, the remedy to everything that is going on right now is the Clean New Deal and the precepts of the Clean New Deal. We got to, one, get rid of or create a new Glass-Steagall, which separates commercial banking from investment banking, so that the crooks can't gamble with other people's money. But this is the caveat to what they've done before, and what I'm trying to tell you based on the $71 trillion methodology. You can't guarantee with the full faith and the credit of the United States, massive racketeering, i.e. Ponzi schemes. And again, that is not Social Security. Two, you've got to do what Bernie's saying and what we've been saying the whole time. End Citizens United. You got to end dark money forces that are puppeteering this thing in the shadows. Ask victims of P. Diddy, does anything good happen in the dark? Not if you're set up, that's for damn sure. Three, we've got to demonstrate to the American people, which Bernie isn't right now, that $71 trillion was looted. That's created this billionaire class that's above the law and above market forces, which makes them monopolies, which makes it tyranny, which is the whole working class conundrum based on this globalism where all the billionaires around the world, including Putin, are in on it, which juxtaposes an interesting conundrum when we talk about BRICS and BRICS currency, i.e. crypto, and however that's going to shake out during the Trump administration. And oh yeah, a Yanis Varoufakis video on that just popped up on my radar, which I'm going to look at right after this. There's better ways to spend $71 trillion on massive corruption on what is destroying us, especially in light of all the crises that Bernie's going to identify. People, what could we do with the energy paradigm? I've known since maybe 99 that I think the grand total of rebooting our entire infrastructure grid would have been somewhere in the $7 trillion range of the investment, but the capacity on the other side of it would have created trillions times that in terms of the revenue that comes from rebooting the grid, so that the Saudis and Russia and Trump couldn't, drill baby drill in a way that's going to destroy the environment even more and lead to more terrorism and more global war and all the rest that we've seen for the last 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years that undergirds everything. And you all know it. Because where are we going to find the money? Well, like Bill Black, my mentor who consulted me through this whole entire odyssey that led me on my journey to get this information, Stephanie Kelton from MMT, taught Bernie that, yeah, we can fund anything because of the nature of sovereign currency and taxation through the description of MMT, if only we could get all of the Congress on the same page. But they are on the same page, that of billionaires, to use MMT to steal for the billionaire class that are roofing and raping the American dream in all of its facets. And that's what we're trying to tell you, that you guys have got to wake up and smell the roses. Or like, I saw a cool shirt meme on X the other day that somebody posted that Elon can't surf. You remember when that great line from Apocalypse Now when he said, what are they, Charlie can't surf? Elon can't surf. We got to turn the tables on these clowns through satire, through demonstration, through everything, through a massive tidal wave resurgence to purge the misery of tyranny, to unleash the renaissance of possibility, because we've got the technology. We've got the understanding. We've got the verticals. We know exactly what to do. This was all a smash and grab by the villains of the past that just want to basically take us into the recesses of human history. And we know what happens when that happens. 70 million people died in World War II to free us from this stuff. Not to mention what happened in the Civil War and so on and so forth. People do not understand what's on the line here. You're not going to passively get through this without the information. But you got to understand that we can turn the tables when you have the details, because as the rest of the precepts of the Clean New Deal lay out, that you've got to end you got to end qualified immunity. You got to end judicial immunity. And above all else, you cannot have presidential immunity because, like the Dropkick Murphy said 2 days ago, this is not a country of kings. And we know that. And then lastly, like Biden said on the way out, and hopefully Bernie maybe echoes it, is you got to stop insider trading for members of Congress. They can't be enriched on selling us all down the river, because that means we're not a government of, by, and for the people. We're a government of, by, and for the corruption. But the people have got to hold the government accountable, which is why Bernie's on the stump trying to electrify the movement, but without the details that I'm giving you. And I am, because my name is Patrick Lovell, the producer. And oh yeah, by the way, how do we deal with the Supreme Court? Well, we got to get 13 of our guys on the Supreme Court to outnumber the Roberts Court that are definitely allowing Trump to run roughshod with this insane betrayal of the United States, because they're all corrupt. When a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it, a moral code to glorify it. Jesus Christ, same as it ever was. The greatest depiction of this in a song was the Rolling Stones' Sympathy for the Devil. We all know this stuff, people. And I know there's like probably one other point that I might want to make. Yeah, I guess I could make this point as it relates to, and it's kind of the final consideration, because I'm sure a lot of people, that are Bernie supporters might think about this. But then again, we wouldn't have Bernie if that was the case. What I'm about to say, we should have term limits. We don't want any Mitch McConnells that are there forever to be able to give us a Roberts Court, because they're diabolical. And they're really good at outsmarting at that time, which was Obama. But you know why? Why are we in this whole mess, guys? Why are we in this whole mess? Obama failed us. Obama rode a populist mandate for hope and change we can believe in that were platitudes, that were all the details of what I'm revealing to you, and he played ball. How much is Obama worth now? Okay? And no, I'm not one of these idiot MAGAs that want to somehow, correlate some stupid sophomoric, incel humor about Michelle Obama, who's one of the most lovely human beings I've ever, witnessed. She's a beautiful human being. But the Obamas did not, they worked within the white shoe law firms, okay? They know who they worked for. And Obama was rewarded. Look at where Obama is now, and Obama's silent, and quite frankly, this is interesting in terms of everything that Obama is involved with, but that Bernie's involved with. But ultimately, where the hell is Kamala? Why isn't Kamala talking about all of the things that we should be talking about? Yeah, I'll tell you that Biden, in my opinion, guys, was Neville Chamberlain. How many people saw that picture of Biden shaking hands with Trump in the Oval Office after everything that we've seen? Because the insurrection was just the beginning, and I could go off on tangent about the insurrection. Okay? Yeah, they just rolled over. Where was the prosecutor versus the felon? Kamala just wanted to do hope and change we can believe in part two by etch-a-sketching the last 14 years and going, hey, let's get out of this bad relationship and let's move forward. And we got a great plan to do that. So vote for me. She didn't win she didn't lose by much, but obviously they spent $1.5 billion on celebrities to make you feel good about her and that it's all cool and that they played that game without the details. People, you got to understand that without you understanding the details, you cannot understand how they're pissing on your head telling you it's rain. You cannot turn the tables. You cannot get on your toes. You cannot fight a fight on your heels. The only way to be at least on par with being able to turn the tables on the corruption that has devastated the country we all love is to be able to lop on what it is that I'm telling you. And my name's Patrick Lovell because this is the mother of all truth bombs, okay? Because when you have the truth, you live in light. When you lie, you are depraved. When you have the truth, you're bulletproof. When you lie, inside you lie. Stop lying, stop buying lies. If you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in liberty and dignity and sustainability and beauty and liberty and justice for all, if we unite in unity behind the Clean New Deal, which is just our version of what took place from trust busting through the New Deal, based on all the information that I'm providing you, can we then turn the tables? And the Clean New Deal is our destiny. Because when you become a nuclear reaction vector to the big bang I'm truth, the big bang of truth that I'm dropping, then we can force the light into the darkness. And that's the universal construct. Let there be light. Onwards and upwards. When you join me, this is exodus from bondage and corruption. If you ignore me, we drown.